Welcome to Now Serving a Side of Therapy, your intro guide into the therapeutic world. Together, we'll explore various aspects around how to show up for ourselves and others by tending to our own mental and emotional well-being. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you've joined me. Welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving a Side of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. Today, we are joined by Sohavani. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. And in the last couple of years, it's been a lot of time understanding adult ADD and ADHD. This is a particular personal journey for her and also partly a professional one. Today, we're going to break down the science, the myths, and everyday realities of ADHD. In fact, a lot of the information that we have to discuss here is going to be broken up over a few different episodes. So settle in and hang tight, right? And we'll be going over what exactly is ADHD. We'll cover what it is and how it shows up, what causes it, and some common misconceptions. Whether you've been recently diagnosed or you're supporting someone with ADHD or you're just curious, this information will strive to enhance your understanding of these commonly misunderstood diagnoses. We'd like to consider biopsychosocial components as well in order to kind of help us understand, right, how different factors come into play that may not necessarily contribute to creating ADD or ADHD, but do impact the way that we function within the environment. So we'll be looking into biological and psychological and social components as well. So welcome, Sohavani, for our discussion around this topic. I really appreciate you putting together all of the information.
Thanks for having me, Dalton. I'm excited to be here. And just before we start, there are two different kinds of ADD, right? It's ADD or ADHD. A lot of today, we're just going to combine them, except for when we're specifically talking about the different kinds. But generally, when you hear us say ADHD, we're talking about both.
Got it. So sometimes they'll be used interchangeably, except for when we indicate otherwise.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And for predominantly, we'll be focusing on adults with ADD, ADHD.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about mostly adults, teens and adults. It kind of shows up similarly for that. But yeah, generally, our working professionals is where we're looking.
Got it. And so, you mentioned in the intro, right, that you've spent a lot of time understanding these diagnoses and how they show up for clients. And I'm just curious, like, what made you decide to take that deep dive into this topic?
Yeah. So ADD and ADHD, right, are genetic. It's like 70 to 80% likely. I don't actually know how to say that correctly, but it's hereditary. And so my family has a lot of us have ADD and ADHD. My mom has it. I have it. My sister has it. And it started kind of just with trying to understand myself better. But then as I was getting into this world and into this space, so many of my clients were coming to me with like, my executive functioning is struggling, or like, these things are not working correctly. What's going on? And it became like a fascinating place for me to be. I just like loved seeing the different coping tools people were coming up with, but also just like how each person's ADD and ADHD affects them differently, right? Because it is, while there are general symptoms, the way that those show up for each person is different. And so it was so fascinating, all the different ways that people experience the same diagnosis.
Yeah, so it's no cookie cutter approach, right? Just like with a lot of things, no cookie cutter approach, but also being able to, which makes it a little bit challenging, and being able to identify, right? It can maybe be challenging to identify that for how is it showing up for the person. So just because we're looking for this one particular thing, right? It doesn't show up, doesn't mean, you don't have it, right? It can, like you said, it can look different for different people.
Exactly. So much of this diagnosis is based off of what the person finds interesting and boring. And while I find math and science pretty boring, right? There's some people who are like really dedicated to that. And I was talking to a client and they did really well in school, like straight A's in school. And I was like, tell me about why it didn't show up then, right? And they're like, well, I loved school. School was super interesting to me. And like the grades and getting everything, right? Like the constant feedback loop was really helpful for them. So they did the work, they got the A, that made them feel great. And so then it wasn't until they were in the workspace or into just like what their everyday adult life looks like that they were like, oh wait, that's right. I don't like boring things. Like I can't do them. For them, school was not boring, but for me, school was boring. I struggled. And so it can look so different according to what your personality is and what you find enjoyable and not enjoyable.
So when we talk about ADHD, right, we always like to define things, right, whenever we talk about them. So how you mentioned that, right, is that is a neurodevelopmental condition, right? And that it impacts the executive functioning, right? What other information would you say we could provide to kind of help us define like what it is?
Yeah. So executive functioning is the brain's management system, right? And so it's in charge of planning and organizing, starting and finishing tasks, time management, regulating emotions, and shifting attention when needed. And so for when you have ADD, ADHD, the management system works differently. Some things feel so much harder for someone with this diagnosis than it does for someone else. And the thing that I hear the most often is like, I'm watching my friend and they can just like transition quickly, or I'm watching my friend and their house is organized, right? Like it comes into a lot of comparisons, I think. People are constantly looking at their neurotypical people around them and being like, why is this harder for me? And we'll get into this a little bit later, but the ADD, ADHD brain has a different reward system, which can make consistency and sustained effort towards goals difficult. And we hear that all the time, right? Like I am on a roller coaster. I get really close to my goals. I like for 2 weeks, I'm all in, and then I stop and I can't figure out how to get back on the roll, right? And so it's that reward system that hits differently for people.
And so couple things come to mind for me as you're talking about that. One of them is, like you said, okay, well, if there's this compare and despair aspect to it, right, which we can get into, like how you set up your, and set up your surroundings in order to help you succeed, right? Or even just knowing yourself a little bit more. It's like, okay, you know what? Yes, I am going to suck at school, but I'm going to be great at this really other thing, right? Yeah. So sometimes it's just a matter of like, taking time, right, to over the years to better understand ourselves, to know like how we best operate. And then also when you talked about the reward system, you're saying that might, if people started and stop a project, like that aspect of motivation might be coming up for them, like, oh, I just don't feel motivated, or then they start to judge themselves for, oh, I'm procrastinating, for example, because they aren't able to finish the thing that they set out to do.
Yeah, I think motivation is such a tricky word with ADD and ADHD because almost everyone I talk to is so hyper motivated. If we're defining motivation as the want to do something, right? They all want to do these things. It's more that there's no willpower, right? A lot of my ADD clients who are struggling with, let's say, health, right? They really want to work out every day. The motivation is there. It's more the like, how do I follow through with this that they struggle with? So it's like, yeah, it's slightly different. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, because I'll kind of work with people to think, yeah, like if I were to sit around just waiting, just even neurotypical, right? It's like if I'm just sitting around waiting to feel motivated to go to the gym, I might be waiting a long time, right? Whereas I like to think of discipline, right? Where if I can for me, it's like putting something in the schedule, I'm more likely to follow that, right? And so even though I don't feel motivated to do the thing, because I've kind of, established maybe the system of discipline, I might be more likely to do it. So it's kind of like setting up that structure around myself to help me function optimally.
Yeah, structure can be super helpful. Discipline, I think it's tricky also with ADD and ADHD because of that reward system that we talked about, right? So someone neurotypical can, think about, let's say, doing that homework assignment, doing the project, going to work out, whatever it is. They're thinking about this difficult task, and they can kind of say like, oh, once I'm done with this task, I'll feel really good. And then just having that thought releases dopamine and some other chemicals in their brain. And dopamine is our motivation drug, right? So that dopamine releases in their brain, that's enough dopamine for them to go ahead and get started. And so then when they finish, they're like, oh, great. Like, I feel so good about this. And that releases even more dopamine. For an ADD and ADHD brain, they're looking at that project, that exercise routine, whatever, and when they think I'm going to feel so good when I finish this, no dopamine is released. It's not the same, right? So they're like, yeah, I get it logically. I'm going to feel so good when this is done, but their body doesn't feel it. And so ADD and ADHD is much more about like tricking yourself into discipline than it is just about discipline. Like Nike's whole thing of like, just do it does not exist for ADD and ADHD.
It does not exist.
No, it's not going to happen. It's more about what are the systems and coping tools that we can help you put into place so that you can do the thing.
And that's huge, right? I mean, who knows, right? If, people might have been, struggling with, some symptoms and maybe not even being able to identify what it is at first, right? But it seems like that could be a reason why someone would maybe want to seek out therapy or seek out professional help or seek out a proper diagnosis, right? If they find themselves kind of like struggling in some of these areas that we're getting into, right? Maybe just, trying to explore ways of like, okay, well, maybe not something, instead of kind of taking away from that kind of self-judgment place, instead of kind of like, okay, well, let me see how I can get some help around this.
Exactly. Yeah. What I'm hoping to do today is that we're really going to delve into the two different kinds of ADD. So ADD and ADHD, right? And then we're really going to look at symptoms. And I don't mean in the way that like TikTok looks at it. I mean, like, we're really going to break down how it goes into every aspect of your life so that when you're sitting here and you're listening, you can really think about like, is this me or is this not me? And the way that the diagnosis works is that, let's say you really struggle financially, but you're good in every other aspect of your life, you probably don't have this diagnosis. But as I'm breaking down symptoms, as I'm talking about how it can affect multiple aspects of your life, if you're seeing it touch 3 or 4 different places, right, then yes, like that's a great time to bring it up to your therapist around, look, it's affecting me in so many different categories. I think we should talk about it.
Yeah, and that's great, right? Like you said, it's got to pop up in different domains, as we call it, right? Different parts of our lives. And I'm glad that you mentioned this because it does get a lot of press, right? ADD, ADHD gets a lot of press, and people might even, just nonchalantly say, "Oh yeah, well I have it," right, without having official diagnosis. But again, having that self-awareness can be a starting point, right? And at the same time, going through kind of some of these symptoms and the presentation, right, just to kind of like break it down, might be able to see, okay, well, how much of this applies to me and how much doesn't.
Yeah. This diagnosis gets so much press. And I don't think the press gets it accurate around how much it impacts the people that have it. I think sometimes we see it as kind of like a superficial diagnosis. But we don't fully talk about like how it impacts divorce rates, how it impacts health conditions, how you're twice as likely to get diabetes if you have ADD or ADHD, right? Like, this diagnosis has real life impacts on every aspect of your life, including saving, including relationships, right? Like, and the press doesn't really get into that. It gets into more like, oh, like you procrastinate, or oh, like you have a bad time with like time management. And while those things exist, it's how are those things actually impacting the rest of your life?
Yeah, great idea. So let's get into what some of those symptoms and presentations are.
Let's do it. So there's a predominantly inattentive type, and there's predominantly a hyperactive type, and then there's the combined type. For inattentive, the main challenge is that you may get easily distracted, struggle with organization, starting projects, hitting a wall when you finish them. We're going to get a lot more into this, so I'm not going to keep going. But predominantly inattentive, you're having a hard time being able to focus. Predominantly hyperactive, you're having a hard time focusing, but you're also restless. you're fidgeting, you're blurting things out, your impulse control is more impacted than with the inattentive type. And then the combined type is a fun combination of both. I had a client who had both, and she was like, great, like, thank you God for this. Like, could not catch a break even within this.
Right. It's like, don't feel like a winner here.
Yeah, exactly. So the core symptoms are inattention, forgetfulness, poor organization, difficulty focusing on conversations, work, right? And one of the symptoms that I really want to focus on is emotion dysregulation. It's very common in ADD and ADHD. It's not something that we talk about often, but it means that people with ADD and ADHD have intense emotional reactions, and they struggle to calm down once they're upset. And they can feel like their moods swing more quickly than other people. So frustration can turn into anger really quickly. A small setback can feel overwhelming. And people giving you feedback can feel like full out rejection. And it can feel really overwhelming. And the thing that I hear the most is that people feel like they're being dramatic, or people in their lives tell them that they're being too sensitive. And they can get really frustrated with this, because once again, logically, they get that, like, oh, someone just critiqued, the grammar in my writing, but the way that it feels inside their body is I am a shitty writer, right? And that might even stop them from continuing the project or writing the next time they have to.
What is it about that, you think, where that emotional dysregulation piece becomes more of a challenge in this way?
I'm sure it has to do with the dopamine and then the norepinephrine. I can never get it right.
Oh, that's right. That's right. The norepinephrine. That's right.
Yes, I'm just not even going to try. But yes, I'm sure that those two drugs really help us regulate our emotions. With ADD, we struggle.
So kind of with those neurotransmitters and kind of the way that those are impacted in the physiology of the brain functioning. Yeah. I see. That sounds really frustrating. Right? Yeah.
It sounds so frustrating to understand logically that this is just feedback on my work, but to like actually feel it hit like a gut punch, right? And to like, I feel like the thing that I hear the most is people are constantly stuck in this like struggle that they feel between themselves. Logically, I get this. Emotionally, I can't do it. Logically, I get that if I work out every day, I'll feel better. Emotionally, I can't get myself there. And it's this constant like pull that they're always in, which gets really overwhelming and exhausting.
Yeah, and I could see how they, someone might even start to feel frustrated with themselves. Like if they're trying so hard, again, like you said, the motivation is there, right? The desire is there, right? Yeah. But then you try to like put the pieces together and it's like, oh, why can't I do this?
Yeah, it's something that we'll talk about later, but this lack of self-trust that ends up being created because of this constant struggle.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's huge, huh? Yeah.
It's huge. Yeah. It's a huge part of how you see yourself, how you feel like you're capable in this world. And I can't tell you how many clients tell me, like, I don't feel like a real adult because of the way that ADD and ADHD affect me.
Yeah, again, probably not something that gets regularly discussed, right, in the media around how this impacts people's lives. And like you said, in the view of themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And before we keep digging into all the different ways that it shows up, I want to reiterate that it's different for each person, right? So personally, I can keep a clean house very easily. An organized space really makes me feel good. I can do that. But working out has been a lifelong struggle. I have a close friend. She can work out, right? She is working out every day, but her house is a mess. And so that's where the personality traits come in, right? It's like looking at who you are and what you find enjoyable, and how that's impacting what you can get done. And I'm bringing that up as we go along, so you're not like, well, I don't know. So you're not being like, well, I can keep a clean house, so I don't have this, or I can't keep a clean house, so I definitely have this, right? It's so much more complicated.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily rule out or rule in, right? A lot very complicated, kind of has some things to consider in many respects.
Yeah. So as I'm going to scroll down, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about is gender differences, right? For just societally, we've taught men to be more externalizing in general, right? So men are often diagnosed earlier because the way that these symptoms show up is more hyperactivity, it's more impulsivity. They tend to be, it's that little boy in the back of the class, like making noise once he's done with his homework and throwing
getting
the ball
all the attention and
all the attention.
Likely not the right ways, unfortunately.
Yeah, likely not the right ways, but it's definitely like making noise and is being seen, right? Girls are not socialized to like externalize in the same way. We're socialized to be more internal. And so while they're struggling with probably the same things, you might see, or you, if you are a woman, might have been doodling in class instead of making jokes with your neighbor. You might have been reading quietly when you thought an assignment was boring instead of like walking around the classroom. So they're just gonna, women and men might have symptoms that just show up a little bit differently.
And as such, like you said, with maybe even males might be more assessed and diagnosed earlier on than females too because of that.
Yes, almost all of my adult ADD clients are women right now. That partly is my own caseload. I skew more women-based anyway, but it is a lot of the women that haven't been diagnosed that are starting to come in and be like, wait, I struggle with this.
Oh, so you work with clients who haven't been diagnosed yet?
Yeah, we work on getting them diagnosed. We work on, even sometimes clients don't want to get diagnosed, but they want to look at just the symptoms and be able to figure out coping tools, right? It's not even, the diagnosis itself holds weight, but just being able to be like, these are the ways that I'm impacted. How can I work through it?
Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to check out our next episode as we continue to explore more elements of your therapeutic journey.